Welcome to the Make a Statement podcast with Derek Robinson and Paul Taillon, presented by Mass Strategy. Let's go.
Okay, everybody, welcome to episode 1 of Make a Statement, where we teach you what to say, how to say it, and where to say it, because we believe everyone deserves to have their message heard. Today, basically, we're interviewing Paul Taillon, Mass Strategy's own new Chief Strategy Officer, and we're excited to talk about impossible choices that politicians face. So this is very personal to us because we've both worked in the offices of premiers. Paul's worked in 3. I've only worked in 1 and a little bit in 2. So Paul, Paul, why don't you give us some of your history? What's your background so people know?
Yeah, so I started out in business. I can give you kind of the long form story. I started out thinking that, I was going to do business, and I was always had a keen interest in politics. So when I came back home to Saskatchewan after doing school in Ottawa for 4 years, I did a stint on Parliament Hill, and I was pretty satisfied with doing, 2 to 3 years of part-time work for a minister on Parliament Hill. And I was kind of thinking I was done with politics. And then I came back here and in Saskatchewan, I got sucked into it again. That guy, Derek, brought me into Premier Bradwell's office, who I said was the last politician I ever worked for. Spoiler, I worked for 2 more after that. But yeah, I had a good 6.5 year long run with Premier Bradwell, with working with Derek. I think we did a pretty good job of helping brand the Premier as one of the most effective leaders in the country. And then took over for Premier Moe when he became Premier, and helped him, introduce himself to Saskatchewan people, develop his digital brand a little bit more strongly.
That's when you kicked me out of the office, basically, because you're like, move aside, Derek, I'm taking over. And then I was like, fine, I'll start my own business.
This partnership is done.
Yeah. No, I left willingly. Paul was nice to me. He didn't kick me out.
It was fun. I remember you were sitting, I think, with your laptop outside of the office, like on a shoebox or something, for the last couple of weeks. And I kind of felt bad for you, but also I didn't. I think I gave you some petty admin work to do in that last couple of weeks.
I used to be this important senior staffer, and then I was like at the intern desk for 2 weeks while you took over for me. So that was good.
That was fun. No, I really enjoyed taking over for Premier Moe. Got to work with a new senior staff team there, and really got to understand, I think, a little bit more. I wasn't there in 2007 when Brad became the Premier, so I didn't have a front row seat to what a new leader kind of would do to help make his stamp or make a statement on the office that he holds. So I think we did that pretty effectively with Premier Moe. He's done a really good job, even beyond me leaving. And to that point, I decided that it was time to go to Alberta and try a new adventure out. I've always kind of wanted to go out west, and it was a little closer to my wife's family, and made sense, I think, from our family standpoint. So I enjoyed working in Premier Kenney's office for 2 years, helping him get set up in a new government and imprinting his brand. Obviously, a very seasoned politician, so it was good to work with a guy like that who is having a heck of a ride as Premier for the first 2 years, and I really enjoyed that, and decided that after 10 years in politics, it was time to go out and build my resume on the private sector side of the ledger. So I'm glad to have had the 10 years of background experience, and have finally kind of kicked the formal political habit for good, except not really, because we still do work in politics in this case too.
And that's very fun. We'll talk about that. But yeah, a decade of political experience with premiers, which was amazing. And I just think a shout out we can give to all the staff members we work with. Like, I know in Premier Wall's office, and I worked with a new senior team in Premier Moe's office briefly, but just fantastic people in those offices. Obviously, I don't know too many in Mr. Kenney's office, but you do. And I don't know, what's some of your experiences working with all those folks?
Great point, actually. And I think it does deserve that these political servants get a shout out, because it's not always gratifying work. It's I don't want to call it slave labor either, but it is a grind.
It's close to that. Yeah.
It's very difficult. And it's not really popular to feel sorry for political staff, because they are often taking the heat for their politicians on the front lines and having to communicate things that are very difficult often to communicate. So, but those political staff do a heck of a job. And to those who slave it out, whether they do it for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, we should all be appreciative for their service. Our country is better for it. And I think that those people are actually better for that service as well. They end up being decision makers and shapers in our society. And I don't say that to scratch my own back. I actually mean that of all my colleagues who I've worked with before. And I'm eternally grateful for the relationships and networks I've built in those offices.
Yeah, no, me too. And I always felt like, of any communicators in the world that know how to make statements efficiently and with high impact and clarity, it's political staffers. you basically have to take a complicated issue in government, which are typically very confusing and convoluted, and you have to sort of pick what you're going to say and help your minister or your premier say it. It's not easy to do, and you're doing it sort of on a daily basis, whether in question period in the legislature or through news releases and different announcements. It's quite intense. And so if there's anyone out there that's listening to this that's like, should I hire someone that was a former political staffer? Yes, they are actually quite skilled and they have very good connections, and you should do that. So I know we're always kind of looking for people that have political experience to hire, and anybody else should definitely consider those folks as well.
Yeah, they're great hard workers. And I think at the end of the day, they have a lot of helpful insights to share on how the sausage gets made behind the scenes. A lot of us, can be armchair quarterbacks when we don't really see what's going on. And, we think this is a disaster of a scenario. And really the political staff behind the scenes are giving it all they got to try and keep the thing together. Especially
in a crisis, like I know we managed when there was provincial fires, and you've done COVID work with premiers as well. But I know fires and floods, all those things, like the political staffers are on the front lines with also, I guess we could say, some great public servants as well. People don't understand the difference between political staff and, public servants or the civil service. But basically your political staff, just so everybody knows this, are the ones that primarily work with your minister or your premier. They deal with kind of the political decisions, making sure it aligns with the electoral mandate, communicating those political decisions and helping, give that information to the public. Where your public servants are more doing research, recommending policies and then implementing the policies rather than kind of making the decisions all the time and communicating the decisions. So that's going to be, but I worked with fantastic public servants,
Right. And to be clear, the public servants stay when there's a change in government for the most part.
Yeah.
And political staff change when the government changes for the most part, because the political staff are loyal to the politicians who are elected. And it's typical that a new coming government would not keep the same political staff of a different partisan leaning than their own party.
We served at the pleasure of the premier is how you would say it. So if Brad Wall was not the premier anymore, we would get fired promptly. So that was, so the political staffers do not have good job security either, because their leader could change or get defeated in an election. So anyways, talking about being an armchair quarterback and figuring out how the sausage gets made, as you referenced earlier, there's a lot of our armchair quarterbacks these days in politics. And we're sort of having this episode to sort of explain to people what happens behind the scenes when these decisions get made of politicians, and how, there seems to be always upset people no matter what happens. And I feel like that's only increasing with social media and the misinformation that's all happening out there. Paul, you've worked in this in both provinces. You've seen the differences. What are your general thoughts?
Yeah, I just think the temperature dial has been raised consistently. There's a league of people who are highly attuned to every single thing going on in the political environment. And that's true in Saskatchewan. It's becoming a lot more true in Saskatchewan, but it has been true in Alberta for quite some time, since there's been obviously a change. I honestly, I think I could probably draw it back to Premier Redford in Alberta. And I remember watching that unfold in Saskatchewan and always kind of wondering if one day I would be part of the Alberta political scene, because it seemed like a pretty cool place to learn how learn the ropes and learn kind of what was going on. And but it's for sure that, being an observer of that political scene is a lot different than being in that political scene and being a part of it. And it sure was eye-opening to be part of that for the first 2 years here in Alberta.
Just tell me the difference between Saskatchewan and Alberta politics. What are the key differences?
I think Saskatchewan people are just generally they want to kind of believe their government is generally doing the right thing. And from what I've observed in my couple of years here in Alberta, Albertans are a lot more skeptical of government and just generally kind of try to avoid government in their lives wherever it doesn't need to be there. So whereas Saskatchewan people generally have a little more faith in government, Albertans a little more skeptical, a little more kind of leave me alone government. I'll do what I need to do.
More libertarian.
Stay in your lane.
Yeah. And I notice in Alberta politics these days, it seems like, Jason Kenney aside, I think no matter what political leader was sort of handling COVID in Alberta, it would have been a tremendous struggle. And I know you saw that working in Kenney's office during the whole COVID thing. Sort of explain how some of those decisions were filtered through sort of behind the scenes and how it kind of maybe felt the response was going to be once those decisions were made.
Sure. Maybe I'll just lay the groundwork for folks for the political environment. I don't think it'll be a shock to most people who've either watched at one point or another that Alberta had been going through 5 years of economic struggle and stagnation. And so this is all kind of building up. And I felt like in 2019, late 2019, early 2020, we started to kind of see a bit of a turning of the corner. We really felt like 2020 was going to be a turnaround year. We had positive signs. Oil prices were building up higher. A lot of economic indicators were trending in the right direction. A lot of people were feeling good about 2020, and then we got slammed by a pandemic, which, as people know, it was a triple black swan event in Alberta. We had obviously the global economic recession. We had the OPEC Russia-Saudi oil price war, which tanked oil prices to negative $30 a barrel at one point.
And then this still doesn't make sense to me. Negative 30, like I have to pay to
here, take my oil and I'll pay you $30 for this barrel.
And now it's like $60 a barrel, and everyone's like, oh, it's gonna go 70. Like that is so dramatic. It's just such a once in a lifetime.
Yeah, try and base a budget on that, right?
Yeah, easy, totally easy. Yeah. No problem.
So that's that. And then of course the economic crisis that just was deepened here in Alberta, apart from the global economic crash. So we had those three kind of events just completely sideswipe the province. And it was, you already had kind of an electorate that was hoping for change, hoping for things really to turn around, and then this hits us. And so, the first element is obviously just shock, right? Everybody's just completely shocked this is happening. How, responding to that shock. Generally, people are pretty willing to forgive their politicians for the first little bit as they're responding to it. But almost instantly, I remember it was just responding to the whims of whatever the public was kind of asking for. And actually the media played a decent role in that too, because they would often be observing trends in other provinces and other countries. And they would say, well, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you closing schools down? Why aren't you doing that? And so there was a lot of back and forth between how the media would influence the public, a public highly attuned to watching the news, and then politicians having to respond to that. So it made for a really interesting show. And to give a little more background on the sausage making, all decisions would go to a advisory cabinet committee. It had gone through a few different kind of name convention changes, but essentially there was a core group of cabinet ministers, the chief medical officer of health, that were in charge of kind of the decision making around COVID restrictions, and then how we would try and prevent the spread of COVID-19 while still trying to protect people's livelihoods at the same time.
Right. Yeah, I felt like in Alberta, it was the most free place in Canada for restrictions for some period of time. And it sounded like the government was pretty happy about that. And that sort of goes to the libertarian bent of Alberta. But then all of a sudden, the situation kind of shifted where Alberta was the hotspot for COVID in Canada for one reason or another. And then the restrictions had to come.
I think our memory is so, it's so short term when it comes to COVID. We've been in this for 15 months. And I think folks forget that, remember the resurgence or the insurgence of COVID was in Quebec and Ontario. We had thousands of people dying in seniors' care homes. And yet here in Alberta, well, we had done a pretty good job of locking down. There's a lot of hindsight that we could offer to our situation for sure. But we had done a pretty good job of mitigating COVID, like you said, with a light touch on restrictions. We'd gotten up until that really well with that, up until the fall when we had that wave after Thanksgiving hit. And then it was like all hell broke loose. And it was just like, how do we deal with this now? We have a resurgence in cases, people who are not willing to want to buckle down on restrictions, and others who are asking, when are the restrictions coming? It's been, we see the case numbers growing. What are you doing about it? So try being the politician in that case, with a completely divided electorate and almost no room in the middle.
And that's how I sort of felt was this impossible choices thing that Jason Kenney was in, is that he was trying to keep it open and free and, kind of aligning with Alberta's sort of culture in a lot of ways. And then now he has to lock everything down, because that was really the only solution, because there was no vaccines at any level yet. And, you could blame Trudeau a little bit for that, but that gets a little bit old every week going out saying that. So then you have people on sort of in his base, and mostly in rural Alberta, but also in cities as well, that a good portion of them think it's just a scam, and they don't know anyone personally affected by COVID. They're not following, what's happening in India and other parts of the world, where it's just the, massive humanitarian crisis in different ways. And then you have the people that are mostly on the left for whatever reason, that just believe that everything should be locked down. And so even if you did incredible strict lockdowns, it still was never enough. And then you have people in the middle that are just mad because everyone else is mad. And it's just like, it just sort of all collided together in this big, massive anger towards the premier. And I started watching it from afar and being like, this seems really bad.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, if you looked at the polling, and there was various amounts of polling, and a lot of it is public, you could see it, whether it's well-known people like Janet Brown doing polling or others, where we've seen people are generally satisfied with where the government landed on restrictions. And then if you ask them, are you satisfied with how what a job the government's done in terms of implementing those restrictions, they're not happy. And so it's like, hang on, you like the restrictions, or you like where things are at, you think it's a good balance, but you don't like the people who've done that. So there's obviously a bit of a dissatisfaction with politicians. Maybe part of that is political fatigue, people seeing their politicians every day on TV, seeing them almost as the faces of COVID, right? And is that something that is the politicians could avoid? Probably not, because the moment that you step out of the spotlight, people are saying, where's my leadership? Why are they not there? And then the moment they're there, day in and day out, it's like, I don't want to hear the politicians, I want to hear the scientists. So make up your mind, right? But
the public was just delusional in some ways of everything that was going on, and it's just they were just like my kid that you just can't control no matter what you do sometimes. And I even think like Brian Pallister was being, crying on TV and being like, I'm the guy who ruined Christmas and all that sort of thing. And it's just like, when you look at the government, it's like, they're the ones that ruined Christmas. They're the ones that kept my kid from playing hockey. They're the ones that ruined my wedding, or like whatever it is, right? And it's like, it's fair, but it's like, what do you expect them
it's
to
also
do?
It's tale as old as time, right? I mean, blame the government when things don't go well. And I'm as guilty of it as anybody else. Yeah, of course. It's like, I'll just blame the government because that'll make my problems go away. No, it won't. But at the same time, I mean, you raised a good point. I mean, a guy like Brian Pallister, and I mean, one could argue whether it was kind of for theatrics or not, the show that he put on right before Christmas. But these politicians have actually said this in variations. The premier was in the House the other day of Saskatchewan, Scott Moe. And it was, I was quite moved by what I saw. Moving. He talked about, all the tough choices of people in care homes, having to isolate those folks, not letting them see their grandkids, and grandkids not being able to see their grandparents, and sometimes kids and their parents. And so you think about that on a level where, it's easy to criticize that decision as somebody from the outside, but imagine being that person, that politician who had to make the final call to say, no, restaurants are shut down, and they have to be shut down for the good of what we're going through right now to minimize the impact on people's lives. But that also means that I'm going to ruin this person's business, and I don't have a choice. There is no good choice at this point in time. To those folks who say, well, you could have just left everything open. No, you couldn't have. It's not, there would have been no public tolerance for people leaving things completely open to the detriment of our hospitals and the healthcare workers going through that day in and day out, dealing with patients in and out of the ICUs. We would have had people patients flooding into field hospitals, which were prepared, by the way, in Alberta. We had facilities prepared to take in, if the numbers got way out of hand, and they didn't, because our politicians made the choices that nobody wanted them to make.
Well, they didn't sign up to do this job. Like, this is a horrendous job that they have to do. And they know, don't kid yourself, everyone listening to this, they know most of the restrictions kind of don't make sense in lots of ways, but they still have to make the decisions. Yeah. So it's like, I get it. My church follows the regulations. Why lock down all the churches? Why lock down my restaurant? That restaurant was fine. It didn't violate the rules. Well, there was 10 that did violate the rules, and they caused a huge, massive spreading incident. So it's like, but you don't see all that. And it's so frustrating. I know, for these leaders, because they don't want to do it. They know it doesn't make sense. And they're regular people like you or I. Like, when you talk to them, they're very good-willed. I haven't met anyone in politics yet, like an actual elected politician, where I don't think they're actually a good person after I talk.
Yeah. And that goes for left of center, right of center. That's across the spectrum. People in politics, whether they're of a partisan bend that I certainly don't agree with, or one that I certainly do agree with, none of those people are in politics generally for the wrong reasons. Everyone I've met, like Derek has said, has been in it for the right reasons. And whether I agreed with them or not, I respected their public service for what they did. It can't be said enough, whether you're talking about politicians or political staff, right?
I think the other thing that we're seeing, and we deal with this on a daily basis, being digital people and digital communicators, but the level of misinformation on social media, and even in like the comment sections, that it's just like an all-out brawl nowadays for politicians. Like, I remember when we started Brad Wall's Facebook and Twitter and whatnot, it wasn't like that. Like, it was like fairly rational. Like, you'd have the odd weirdo kind of saying something crazy, but now it's just flooded with people that are just saying insane things and threatening politicians' lives and whatnot. And it's like, these are regular human beings, and you're treating them like they're less than human. Like, you treat
point,
animals better than you're treating your politicians. Like,
you're very right about that. I think we were lucky with Brad too, because he was genuinely a very popular politician in the province.
Yeah.
To what I said earlier, I think I recall seeing the sort of resurgence of that commentary. I don't think it was an isolated trend. I think it was happening elsewhere in the world, but especially with Premier Redford in Alberta, like her or hate her or public service. Obviously, there's lots to criticize there, but there was incredible amounts of vitriol that went out towards her. And I think I recall kind of seeing the tide turn, especially in Alberta then. And then it kind of has started to percolate into Saskatchewan's political theater discussion as well. These days, and there's certain actors that are responsible for that.
I was listening to John Gormley on who's CGME CKOM in Saskatchewan, kind of the talk show radio host in the morning, really well known. He was sort of saying it's turned for him too, where for some reason during this pandemic, with all the misinformation and all the anger and the frustration, he's getting death threats. And he's been doing it for 20 years or 25 years or something on the radio. The texts and emails that he gets, he's like, where are these people coming from? Like, what did I do to you sort of thing? And mostly people that were sort of on the scamdemic side of things. And he's just like, there's never been an issue like this that has enraged people. And it's not like Gormley's like a big pro restrictions guy. He's not. But even just the fact that he's sort of accepting some of the things, some of the restrictions, and understand, they're reasonable for lots of different reasons. Like people just wanted to cancel him. It's just like, I think it's part of the cancel culture is like, you need to cancel all the politicians as soon as they make a mistake. They run these giant organizations that are responsible for so much in the world. There's going to be things, you guys. I don't care. Like, I think no matter who you elect, you're going to hate them nowadays. And it's just not realistic.
And during COVID, I mean, perfection was the enemy of the good, right? The reason that everybody had to make difficult choices, was because we had no time to move. To expect your politicians to make perfect choices in this kind of environment, let alone at a normal time, in this kind of environment, in a once-in-a-century pandemic, is just completely unreasonable. To your point about social media trolls, I think it's just, and maybe we'll cover this in another episode later on, but this veil of anonymity, I think, that allows people to make these kinds of threats and these kinds of statements to people. Leave aside criticism and fair criticism. I think that's totally fair game. If you want to criticize a politician's choices reasonably in a civil manner on social media, go for it. That's your prerogative. Go for it. But to take that to another complete level with threats and the level of name calling and personal degradation that people employ on social media, it's embarrassing, it's shameful, and I don't really know what the solution is. I think that the platform itself offers kind of that benefit of anonymity at a certain level, but also it's caused our civil discourse to degrade. It
used to be just people that had like fake names, and they were just like eggs on Twitter, like their icon, like they weren't real people. They were just like made up people. But now I almost see like real people that it's like I could call up that like work in businesses and stuff that are doing that sort of thing. And I'm like, when did this become acceptable that we're allowed to just like name call in the most unfair, hurtful way possible to and like, they're just punching bags now. It's
but do you think these losers of these armchairs would actually make those threats in public? Like I gotta kind of wonder. I don't think they would either. I think if they actually stood up to you or if they made that threat to me on social media and then actually stood up to me, not that I'm someone of very tall stature, but if they stood up to me anyways, I don't think they would actually have the balls to make that kind of assertion.
No, they wouldn't. And like, I've always found people when they meet politicians in person, they're actually quite respectful, other than maybe the few activists that try to disrupt a public meeting or whatnot. But yeah, like, it's just like, my thing is, if you're not willing to say that to someone's face, why say it on social media to them? Because they read it. And it's like, mental health of our leaders is actually like a legitimate concern. And like, we actually want good people to go into politics. I've seen enough now that I'm like, I don't really want to put my family through this. Like, I've run for politics before and I wasn't successful, but it's like, I'm almost happy because I see what's going on. And I'm like, is this really the life that I want to lead for the amount of pay that it is? People think they're overpaid and whatnot. I'm kind of like, I kind of want to attract better people, and money is an incentive to do that, especially at a provincial level where they don't get paid that much.
Yeah, the reasons for running are starting to like counter a lot more against than for a lot of people. I'm not saying that we have the absolute most perfect people. I don't think anybody asserts that we have the most perfect people in politics. But if you wanted better people in politics, do you think subjecting them to this level of kind of discourse and this kind of environment, whether it's social media or just kind of the conduct of people in general towards their politicians, do you think that's going to help you get better politicians by saying that they're overpaid, they should work for nothing, they should get a complete cut in pay, that they should, fire all the political staff? who do you think you're going to draw to the political arena when you make all those kinds of calls?
We could probably do a big episode about cancel culture and social media trolls, because it sort of feeds from that, I think, too. It's like someone does something wrong and you don't agree with them politically, so you just want to cancel them and get rid of them. I get it. We've maybe been guilty of that in some of the work we've done in the past, right? But it's, as a general rule, it's like you can't go over the line. And I just feel like there's so many people over the line where it's not criticism. It's just like, you as a human being are horrible and you should not exist. Like that's sort of the level that like a good chunk of like a third of the discourse is now. And I'm like, oh, like that's pretty intense. So anyways, like we don't have to belabor this point too much, but I think the fact is we're just kind of encouraging people to give some of these leaders a break in some ways and try to have a little more civility, and, on social media, try to talk to them like you're talking to them in person, rather than talking behind their back to their face on social media.
Yeah.
I think that's maybe the message here, and just knowing that you're never going to have a perfect political leader.
No. And to the point of, actually, I'll even take this a bridge further, even beyond just our political leaders. We've kind of seen one significant public servant typically in each province come forward, who's been a notable figure of late, our chief medical officers of health, whether it's Dr. Saqib Shahab in Saskatchewan, Dr. Bonnie Henry in BC, Dr. Dina Hinshaw in Alberta, and the litany of them across the country who have been front and center, quote unquote stars in the media, who've been responsible for making a lot of these tough decisions or providing the recommendations to make tough decisions, have been put in the spotlight to answer all of the tough questions on a granular level from media and from the public, and have also been subjected to ridiculously unfair, harsh criticism, threats, and to all of those public servants, I just tip my hat to you. They didn't sign up for that job either. No. Yes, they make, a decent wage. They're entitled to that. They make less than their counterparts in the private sector. I could probably assure you of that.
For sure they do.
So they deserve respect. And I want to tip my hat to them as well in the lumping them in with politicians, especially during this last 15 months.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's probably good for today. Probably not the most popular episode we could have picked for the first one. Is like, give politicians a break. They have some impossible choices to face. People are like, that was if you're trying to have a popular podcast, this is probably the worst idea you could have come up with. But
in fairness, who else is going to defend politicians but the people who formerly worked for them, right? So
True.
let's at least shed some insight on that. I think that the cause was noble. Hopefully it gives people an opportunity to think maybe twice. If they know somebody who has spoken out a little bit in a different way, this gives them a chance to say, hey, you know what? These people actually do have tough decisions to make. Let's cut them a little bit of a break here, and let's make sure that we actually take into account all the choices they have to make that we don't have to.
Yeah, and the balance that they have to achieve, which is impossible nowadays, especially in some Western Canadian provinces that we're seeing. So, well, we hope things are going to go better and everybody stays safe. And I think we're going to be through this thing soon. Hopefully, the science keeps changing all the time, so we'll actually see. That's the other possible thing that we could have talked about. But we'll end it there for now. Paul, great insights, man.
Yeah, this is a good conversation. If you're one of those people, like Derek said, we're almost at the end of this thing. Get vaxxed, get your vaccination so we can all get back to normal. That's where we're headed.
Yep, I'm all vaxxed up. I got my Pfizer superpowers now, so I feel pretty good about that.
Moderna crew over here.
You got your Moderna superpowers? Good. I don't know what abilities you have achieved.
We'll find out.
Mine is making unpopular podcasts. That's the one I've selected. So. All right, thanks, Paul. Appreciate it. We'll talk to everybody again on Make a Statement Podcast.